of, again, they go through school, and they get to high school, and okay, now it's graduation, now it's requirements, now it's grades. Okay, what is this testing doing for me? And trying to get all students to understand what the testing is doing for you is preparing teachers to maybe adjust the teaching style, so or some teaching strategies. So we'll look at that when we get that. Our site council has been up and running, as you guys know, for the last few months. We're in the process right now of evaluating some of the ELA curriculum. One of the things that our site council wants to do is be involved in curriculum decisions. Not necessarily the decision, but at least the evaluation and looking at the engagement point. So we're looking at that. We're looking at our alt ed criteria. What are some ways that we can change or adapt how students get in or out of our alternative education program? You know, typically right now there's 4 ways to get in. It's either being grade deficient, it's being, 3, grade deficient. No, excuse me, 4, it is 4. Grade deficient, being having disciplines issues where you get to a certain number of referrals, having attendance issues, and then the 4th one is if you're coming from an alternative ed program. So if you're somebody that's transferring to our school district from a school district that was in an alternative program. So we're kind of evaluating how do we want that to look, and we want to change that, because what we do have, and I'll talk about this now. Actually, I'm going to wait to talk about that. And then we're also reevaluating our handbook. Ways we can improve our handbook, things that are missing. There's no matter how many times you read through a handbook, every year you'll find something that's missing. Oh, why didn't we have that in it? Or you'll encounter something, as Ms. Tolley knows when it comes to discipline, you'll encounter something that's not in the matrix that we never thought of. I mean, I've been in education as long as I've been in education. It seems like every year we see one thing, it's like, well, that's never happened. So we have to adjust our handbook to that. So our site council, it's a good group of people, and I think they're working hard at that. Had an assembly today. Same thing that was happening last night. I don't know if anybody went to that. ODOT came in, or it wasn't ODOT, it was an ODOT sponsored assembly for a couple that comes in and discuss distracted driving. They talk about their story and how it's affected this lady that was in a crash, lost her parents and her. Great presentation day. We did 2 different groups. We gave it to our freshmen and our sophomore, juniors, and our sophomores and our seniors. Our students did a great job. They asked some good questions. A couple of them asked some really hard questions. So that was great to see. And it was great to see that we had a pep assembly last week. We have Spirit Week this week. We had an assembly with ODOT came in. More people are reaching out to do more assemblies now. We're starting to kind of get back to a little bit of normalcy. So it was a good feeling to see this. In fact, I have that on my thing. I usually wouldn't talk about Spirit Week, but as hard as everything's been for the last 2 years, for kids to be able to do some things, and I mean, and perfect timing for us on the mask thing. You know, the mask. Well, perfect timing would have been earlier, but what I'm saying is not later, because we have a dance Saturday. So Saturday.
helping out. Right now, we've got about 30 kids on the track team. We've got 24 on the baseball team, which is awesome. So we're going to be able to do a half JV schedule with them. And on the softball team, then we've got 10 golfers. Of those 10, we've got 9 girls, 1 boy. So we'll see if that young gentleman sticks it out with that group of girls. But they're a solid group, so I think that's going to be pretty fun for them. But we're excited to go for it. I know middle school track team is going to start up after spring break, and they've already got 30 strong on that. So things are starting to pick back up for our spring sports, which is huge because when they got cut off from 2020, those guys took a really big hit as far as trying to come back with numbers and then those truncated seasons. And so we're pretty excited for them to have an actual true season, true state, actual games going on. So it's going to be fun. That's all I got.
Thank you. Last couple things, make sure everybody knows graduation May 28th, 2 o'clock. Hopefully you got that in your calendar. We'd love to see you there. And I don't want to say it's gonna be outside because that means it'll rain. But we have plans.
Please say it's outside.
Rain.
That's right.
But it doesn't rain until 2 days before,
There you go.
and it'll rain after. How's that sound? So give us that day of sunshine. And then we also had an Avid meeting today, kind of an initial meeting with our teachers and Avid to talk about things that we'll be doing in the Summer Institute when we head down to Anaheim in June. And it was great. Aaron took some notes and we were in there and you know, for us, there were some questions like what are the next steps that our site team needs to take in order to prepare for excellent initial implementation of Avid at our site. And these are questions that we'll really kind of find answers to before we go this summer. So when we go this summer, we're really just figuring out strategies and how we're going to do that. And then obviously, you know, the biggest thing about the Avid mission is to close the gap between the students that are and aren't college and career ready. So we're really excited about it. I think it's gonna be great. And having elective classes, and because I'll go back to what I was gonna say earlier and stuff, we have some kids that are struggling. We have some kids and we have some young kids that are struggling in the classroom. And those struggles, we all know those struggles can be about a lot of things. Those struggles can be, sometimes those struggles are the choices that they make. When it comes to, sometimes it's just a struggle that they don't understand something. How do we get them that help? Maybe there's struggles going on at home. Maybe there's struggles with the pandemic. There's so many things going on in the last 2 years. And we have those kids struggling. And I think that Avid is going to be a good place for them to kind of jump onto a life raft and really kind of give them some support. But in the same breath, we also have a lot of students that are excelling. I mean, I know you saw my report last month. We had 106 kids with over 3.0. I mean, that's almost half of our student body. So you know, we commend the fact that students are getting it done and students are working hard. So we're proud of our students and we're proud of the efforts that they give. And we think that the rest of this year is, you know, we're always positive, we're always optimistic. We're going to continue to push through, and we're hoping for good results at the end. Absolutely. OSAC stuff just was a deadline. We have a ton of students that filed OSAC to get the transcripts and their applications in for scholarships. I think we're going to see a lot of kids get scholarships this year, which is obviously very exciting too. Any questions? Anything you want to guess, sir?
I've heard there's another band called struggles to get a band teacher.
What's that?
Is there other districts that have the kind of struggles we have getting a band instructor?
I think that's a great question. I know a lot of the friends that I stay in touch with are in the Valley. In the Valley, they have a lot more choices, you know, and just because more people, there's more. So my friends have band directors they've had for a long time. I don't know. We can reach out to John Day and Nissa and some of those schools that are over on this side. I think what we're seeing, and again, I could be completely wrong, but I will say this: talking to a couple of my friends that have had openings over on the Valley, they've gone from having 75, 80 applicants 5 years ago to having 10 or 11. So people are not going into education like they did, and if they're in education, they're getting out of education. Now, again, I say that's a small amount, maybe 3-4%, but 3-4%, that's quite a few when you start talking about our profession. So, there was 4 or 5 years ago, nationally, they said we'd have a teaching shortage in 7 years. And we're starting to feel that. We're really starting to feel that. So obviously we have mass concerns as building principals, vice principals, curriculum instructors. We have mass concerns whenever we have openings. So when we get people that have interest, we get excited about that. So I can't answer that from on this side of the state, Mr. Folden. But I do know that there are people on this side of the state that are struggling to fill other positions. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. We got job fairs coming up in April. Is that right, Mr. Quick?
Yep.
And
End of this
we'll
month.
push that out, and we'll continue to sell it because I know the band program here has a long history of doing great. The teacher we had that stepped in this year saved us and did a great job. That band that did some things, but not another concert. But she won't be around. She's gonna leave. So
Do you think that by chance, just because band has always been one of the, I would say the first cut, just band teachers in general, why would you go into that profession in education when a lot of schools don't even offer that? Could that have?
that's a great point. We saw that everybody was around and maybe five kicked in and spotted out and all that stuff back in the mid-90s. Kind of when I got into education. I mean, there were cuts and money was
Right.
it was the worst it has ever
Oh,
been.
yeah.
And they cut, and one of the other ones they cut back then was PE.
Right.
So there were teachers that didn't want to go. Well, now there's things in place in the state for PE. A certain amount of hours each way. I mean, there's
Right.
certain things. There's not necessarily those things that we need in place for those other ones. I can tell you this in front of everybody. I would, and I know me and Mr. Quick have talked and all of you. You'll never ever hear me suggest that we cut band. Or you'll never hear me suggest we cut anything. I was a band guy. I mean, I was a band all my life. Marching bands. I loved it. And
I think you play a pretty good drum, don't you?
what's that?
Don't you play a pretty good drum
I
still?
play a really-
All right.
I'm just saying. I'm just saying. And yes, I do sneak into the band room sometimes and I'm playing the weekends. So, but when it's just you in there by yourself, you sound pretty good. But short and long answer to that, I think that's a great point. I think that could be something that people are worried about in education. The one thing about it right now, and this is, and I've talked to colleges, a couple of colleges, I talked to TVCC today, actually. There's more money in education right now than we've seen in a long, long time. So there's not really anybody making any cuts, right? So this would be a good time to get in. But as we know in the educational world up and down, cuts are going to be happening. Maybe it's 8 years from now. At some point, we never do this and just keep doing this with money. At some point it levels out and maybe drops off a little bit. So there's always that fear. And the other big thing we talk to colleges about people going into education is, they're going to come out of school with $100,000 in loans, and they're going to start a job that pays, $42,000 a year. They come out $100,000 in loans and go into engineering or something that pays $90,000. I mean, it's just.
Fine by me. I want them to try. I want good data. But my fear was if we do it at the high school.
I don't know, finding incentives at the high school level is a little bit more difficult. But if we could tie it to something academically within the classroom, sure. But then again, we're talking about equity, and I don't know how that matches up.
I think it would be really hard to get through communities as why it's important to put an honest effort on that. But it seems like if they could somehow understand when Joe asked, is it tied to their grades? And I instantly thought indirectly it is, because the results of that test can tailor how education is presented to them for the remainder of the year, which will make them perform better and increase their GPA, increase their opportunities to go to colleges or get into trade schools or just finish high school with better GPA. It seems like a lot of adolescents probably aren't too worried about that, but
By the results, it looks like more kids are trying each year. And again, hopefully, we've done this since kindergarten. Yep, this is what we do. It is important. Again, high school's we'll see how the incentives work at the younger grades. I'm a little nervous, the same thing that they'll say, well, I got this system. But again, hopefully, if we can teach the students the importance all the way up, by the time they get to ninth grade, it's just something they do. But that takes more than, again, this would be our 4th year implementing it.
I'm really, and again, everybody in here has gotten to know. I'm an optimist, and I'm really optimistic to see our iReady scores and our SBAC scores in about 3 years, to see what kind of teeth Abbott has. What is it going to do for us and our kids? And if we give it that the due diligence in the classroom and the teaching and things like that, I really think that it's going to help our kids. I really do. Because if people I've talked to out there, there's some schools that aren't Abbott schools, but I haven't talked to an Abbott school that didn't have scores in grad race that went up, that it wasn't a positive. So I'll be interested to see what those look like.
thanks.
Thank you guys. I appreciate it as always.
All right, next up, superintendent's report.
Apologize for running back and forth in our laptop. We have an audio problem. People online, they can just see us or hear us, but not both. I think they're going now, but it's still not out. So hopefully we'll troubleshoot. Make better. My reports, I'll start off here. Mr. Randy Folt's not here. She put together the grow calendar for next year already and presented to you tonight, so I'll make sure it's on at the same time. But I put the calendar together. Really shooting out an email tomorrow. We got to hurry because that calendar for next year really at your board meetings. Hoping it goes just last year kind of dates. Things just kind of lined up. Depending on your calendar here, you can have some that Christmas break works nice and easy with the 2 solid breaks. Kind of depends on when Christmas falls. Want to avoid those Wednesday to Wednesday. That's nice to have Monday, Friday weeks for those. Hopefully next year's calendar. I'll get a calendar committee. There. Did attend the job fair at Eastern Oregon University last Friday at Hector Martinez from elementary school. And that he had some hours that he needed to put in for a practicum that he's working on. We're able to find, we talked to 6 people that were legitimately like they were willing to come down here and take a look at us. A couple of them have found out since, but their application filled out. 1 or 2 of them for district. That's the one job there where I feel like we can get solid candidates that know our area, that from this area, most of them are willing to move a little bit out of the area from anywhere in Eastern Oregon are willing to report, which is nice. That's one of those job fairs where there were definitely more recruiters than there were candidates. In talking to Eastern, a lot of their candidates in the programs this year, whether they have their own restricted teaching licenses already within their school districts. So really, districts have already hired a lot of these people coming out of their programs, because we have a couple of restricted licenses. So they're worth just a little bit. I mean, they're going to hire them up, as right out of student teaching. So some of them are already hired. Hoping to get into the Portland job fair on the 30th. That's the one job fair where the position that's open. That would be the one place to find it. My experience in rural districts, it's just a position of part. out when we got budget cuts. But it's an integral part of our school. You know, we start in elementary, we go through the high school, so just trash a program makes no sense whatsoever. But I know interest has waned in other districts, and here it has not. So hopefully that we can get two music teachers, both at the elementary and the high school next year, so we can get a band program. Enrollment wise, we're at 760 for FTE today, a little bit lower than usual, kind of this downward trend as of today, but I know we have a couple people with the mask mandate going away that have already called and they're interested in back enrolled for the last quarter of the year. It's back on track there. Absolutely. Oh, it's full-time equivalent, so you have full-time students. No, hey, that's totally logical. Then we start talking about ADM and ADM.
Trust me, I've got like abbreviations. The idea what they stand
I should put together an acronym for working now.
This was the third time I wrote it down, so I needed to know what. Got it.
We didn't get any applicants for our budget board today, but the newspaper as well. So really tomorrow I'll get in the newspaper, get in the radio, send out the parents, that spread far and wide between now and our next meeting. Really letting people know what the commitment is. Not a huge commitment to be on the budget board. But done with strategic planning. I'll go through that plan with you later on tonight. That strategic plan to make it a working document that's produced regularly. The document itself has some good accounting built in. So make sure it gets on board agendas and make sure we're talking about it. We make sure that whoever's in charge of the various roles has an account at board level as well as at the that's nice. It's also classified employee appreciation week around the state. We passed a resolution last month, but I do want to publicly recognize our classified employees for the work kind of behind the scenes, people that get things done that we don't always recognize, but I appreciate all of our students progress in our district. We have a walkthrough with the installers of the audio enhancement project. That's the intercom, the cameras in the classroom, the audios, your system in classrooms. Walkthrough tomorrow, so I'm really hoping that we have a solid date when they're going to come. Talk to Andy Whitehead about who the installer is. They've done several of these installs for this company. I feel like it's a large enough company that no schools. And talking to Wade in regards to our facilities, we've had a couple things come up. We have some doorways that definitely need replaced in each of the buildings. And at the original estimate of probably about $80,000 or $90,000 for them. Some of that would come, the cost would come down a little bit because just in walking through with them, he feels like he can replace some hinges. He can fix some of them himself, but a couple of them, Slater, one in middle school. The whole doorway. So I guess the town of Cara figure out where this fits in the budget, how we can make this happen. As you know, with the cost of construction, the cost of materials, it's skyrocketing. So we're going to figure out a way to get that in our budget and make it happen. One thing he has mentioned is our roofs at the high school as well. It's at the end of its warranty. Of course, at the end of warranties, you start to get leaks and things like that. If you get a chance to look at the high school, I'd be good. Go look at the very front peak, just the way they hook that roof on. They the membrane roof that it wraps kind of halfway down the eave. So all the water ends up going right into you. The water just doesn't come off into a gutter or it runs right down and touches you. So if you look at the front of high school, it'll give you kind of a sample of what it looks like all around the building where it's rotting the boards, but you can't replace the boards because of the membranes. So it's just a bad all around. But, it's getting old. I think when they originally did it, they did it in 2 phases. First, and then the rest. But it's running at the end of its life. And I talked to Scott Marshall, who's the architect that worked for facility planning. He said based on the last 3 roofing projects that he's seen for cost per square foot, to replace it all, it'd be $2 coat, put over the top, and make it last maybe another 10 years out. Like that, talking upwards from $400,000 to $500,000 for that size. So, we got to figure out what we're going to do in the next little bit. Not necessarily band-aid our buildings, but fix them in a way that will last forever. I think the strategic plan does have the goal for facilities as a goal moving forward to make kind of permanent solution rather than band-aid solution. I hate to think $500,000. We'll look at that in the coming days. He's actually going to be here tomorrow to work with us with this seismic grant that we received this year. Start walking for us. Same timing study.
Questions? All right, the next topic on the agenda is the budget. Sounds like we have it happening. Does anyone have any ideas? I know when you and I were talking about the agenda and we had it parties and I don't know.
I thought about that today. I think I sent a person an email, but I don't know when it is. I'm gonna follow up with one. I know one of the members on the strategic plan should be excited about getting involved more heavily in the school district. So I would say if you know of members that would be willing to commit the time and the effort into looking at our budget, and members, encourage them to put in a letter of interest to the district. You can do it without more appointees, but I think it looks better, has a little more eyes you get on it, the better. It's set up such that you want the way the law reads, change over 3% of the board every 2 years. So for us, it would be the positions would probably be one something, depending on what the current members are.
And you mentioned that the one member that's on the strategic planning.
I think she would.
So at least 2 good candidates. Okay, well, I guess if anyone here has any ideas of someone that would like to be involved with the district, and I think that's a really great way to begin your involvement is to see how we work financially with this sort of business organization. And the other thing, we'll talk about it later, talk about it in coming meetings, but probably need to talk about succession planning for the superintendent, fine-tuning that job for the board, because every 2 years we have members coming and going. And if there are, we talk about it when we talk about succession planning, but if there are people that we think would be strong board candidates for positions that are coming up that we need to build, that's a really good way to get put in the board. Learn a little bit more about what the district does by serving on that. So that might be a good incentive if you know someone that thinks they'd like to serve on the school board, that would get them. All right, well, since we can't do that, we'll move on to the strategic plan. Can you tell us anything about that?
The strategic plan, we had a committee of administrators, teachers, some community members that helped us out here. The first couple meetings. After that, he said Hawaii was better and he's planning for that. We got input from a lot of people. Talked to a printer. We're going to be able to put this together in a document that we put out there professionally. something that we can rely on, as well as something we have in the district office and be able to hand people, when I go to meetings, I can hand people a one pager, like, here's what we're all about, here's what we're going forward. Really, the plan at the beginning starts off with the message. Hope you got a chance to read that. Really, it's a matter of looking at our future moving forward to make sure we're constantly, we have a vision, a mission, what we're all about, and where we're going to go. Down here, so kind of the core part of it here. We talk about core values in this, and part of those 4 core values that we put together. A lot of discussion was about the maps. We have meaningful communication that is constructive, transparent, and emphasizes shared decision making, connected community, inclusive participation, beneficial partnerships, and a diverse culture. And then prepared students who become lifelong learners, develop their own unique potential, and are prepared for the future. And then the final one is safe learning environments that maximize student achievement, build positive character traits, and respect. We really took those core values when we look at our vision and our mission going forward. We didn't change it a whole lot, but this is really that mission statement. So it identifies our purpose of our organization, and we brought it down to the smaller statement of prepare contributing members of society while honoring Harney County's traditions and diverse cultures. Sometimes people think about Harney County as maybe not being super diverse. We do have a lot of diverse cultures within our community. Might not be able to tell it through the color of our skin, but we have a lot of different people out there, a lot of different backgrounds, and want to be able to honor everybody in our county. The vision statement then from that is kind of where we want, what do we want to achieve in the next 3 years? So really that's maximize student potential through caring employees, effective programs, inclusive community involvement, and updated facilities. As we get down here, you'll see that our goals align with that vision. We did the tagline, I think before it was a path, you should know what it means. Choose your path, right? And we put that over. We chose a different tagline this time to be the best you. Figure that's something that easy to remember. We want our kids to realize that they can go forward with whatever their goals might be. But we want them to set goals and achieve them. We want to really put that tagline on our website, letterheads, digital messages, signs, invoices, whatever we can. We really want to get that out there, kind of brand ourselves in a positive way. Our goals, let's get down to, says here we have 6 performance indicators. Measures. So our first year here says here, well, 2 strategic goals. We have some performance indicators. So the first goal is really graduation and preparation. Like that high school principal in parentheses, that's the person that's accountable for this. Not necessarily all by himself, but make sure we all stay on track and make sure that's a priority. So really that goal is all students will be at grade level, on track to graduate and be successful at their next meaningful step after high school. He's looking more at the high school level, but to get to be on track in 9th grade, you have to have them on track in earlier grades as well. So it's not just a high school thing, but all schools. So the indicators, the first 1A, kindergarten through grade 5 attendance is something that we believe makes a difference in with our students. When they're at school, they're learning, right? The more we can get them here, the more we can learn. And so when we have chronic absenteeism happening, it's really difficult to bring this forward. So we look to reduce chronic absenteeism to less than 3%, but we really want to get our daily attendance rate above that 5%. So the method there by June 2023, so a year from June, K through 5 student daily attendance rate will be 87% or above, and the chronic absentee rate will be 11% lower. So really at the end of next year, we want to look at that in order to set our goals for the following year, because we do want to get to that 95%. terms of middle school, haven't put, we need to find the baseline at the end of the year for this particular goal before we fill it in, but we really want to look at the core classes. We want to make sure that take a 5% increase each year towards passing their core class with a C grade or above. Sometimes middle school kids think, well, I'm going to pass, no matter, I'm going to move on to the next grade regardless. And we just want to put a heavy emphasis on those core classes, passing grades, increasing more and more. Ultimately, we want June 23 and the percent of middle school classes passing all core classes will increase to 80% of the C or above. And the third one under goal 1 is that the implementation of AVID instructional strategies. I'm in charge of that. We have all 3 buildings implementing AVID this year. I need to work with the AVID folks here. You see that measurement on it is by June 2023, every teacher will complete at least 1 strategy. I have to talk to the rep first to see, is that a realistic goal? Is it 2 strategies? Like, what is really realistic for our staff? I mean, I think 1's probably pretty low, but I just need to talk to her to see what's realistic and what other schools have attempted. By implementing AVID, it will make a difference across the levels. Then under goal 2, we had a lot of discussion about this one. Has to do with facility and safety improvements, but talked about the date, and again, this is as a board. We're thinking by November 2020, district design, propose, and pass the capital bond. Prioritize facility and safety. That's a year from November. Make it happen, and it seems fairly fast. So I really defer to you guys to see if that's too fast or not fast enough. I don't know if you want to make it faster.
I think it's good to plan that far in advance to try and pass it on. And as excited as I am with the uncertainty of the pandemic is maybe drawing to an end, I think there is other uncertainty that's going to affect the financial viability of the state and the nation. And I don't know if that'll be a realistic metric. I like setting our goals high, but I personally would prefer to set off a completion goal for that until we have the report that says this is what we need to do. And it sounds like you're talking about the maintenance that Wade was talking about stuff. That process has already started, but I think in order of making it sellable to the community, things like that report would really help. I mean, if the roof is going to cost $2.4 million to replace, and there's really not a good way to band-aid it, that's pretty severe. I don't know if 23 is realistic. Yes.
Well, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, even realistic rate of inflation is like right now, not as anybody paying more taxes on the bond is scared of. Heck, yeah.
While the change between now and hopefully a lot will change now and then. I don't think we can go on this summer, but, for some construction. That said, there is a facility report that's done. I would almost suggest contract with an architectural firm. I think the one last time I like Scott did well. I would like to contract with a different firm that's dealt with this in a different way. As a separate people that can work on the PR piece of it, do a lot more. It might cost us a little bit of money in short term, but I think in the long run, a big difference.
I know there was community outreach done for our last bond that we tried to run, but I think before I contracted with architectural firm or any expensive things like that, I would do a community focus group and see what the pulse is and see if I think that's
very good. Because almost the last one failing, I think almost affects your ability to pass what you need the next time around. So a failed bond is more than just a failed, it's almost like, when everybody's like, well, didn't pass last time, we shouldn't pass this. And so, some outreach to gauge if there's anything in the interest would be a plus.
And that's when you look on 2A here, you know, it's identifying somebody coming in and that can maybe help us do a little bit of outreach to the community. What's realistic possible? Is it possible really? And I think that would depend more on fall and December. But then did determine it was feasible, and I would say too, and then you put together that bond committee that actually works on it. But I think really between August and I would say December next year, that would be the time to really do this. Do you move forward with this or not?
Did we have a financial bond specialist last time? That was the guy that came in who worked with North Powder and some other places.
So that was the architect. Yep. The financial specialist was from DA.
Some, you know, on that, some facility tours and stuff with the public to show them, hey, this is what we're dealing with. We're not just asking for just cause, like you need to see what we're dealing with. So that would give you some time, like you said, that obviously December window. So yeah, some facility tours and stuff, because I actually coached Park and Rec basketball at Slater, and I was surprised at the state of the building. It was not as good as I always figured it was.
I think we've done a good job of picking up on it here and there, but overall, it's a building.
Well, yeah, no, I'm not saying
Right.
there's
Yeah.
anything wrong, it's just
Right.
that letting the public see that we're not just asking for money, just to ask for money.
Getting that engagement's tough too. I
Yes,
mean,
it is.
getting people to volunteer for committee right now is hard all over. What do you, what other business owners think they've seen bonds come and go?
Well, I agree with the fact that we need to, first of all, get a feeling from the community on whether it's even worth putting on. How we do that, I don't know, but I know there's professionals who know how to do that. It might cost us a little bit of money to hire a firm to come in here, arrange for some community meetings. We could help promote the meeting. But like Joe said, it's a different, we're sitting here, we know what's needed. We know what it's gonna cost. We know how much it goes up every year. And I'm just a taxpayer, a wage earner working every day and on weekends too, and saying, gas bill, I gotta do this, I'm not gonna pay another $1,000 on my tax bill for school, and we got it. No,
I have a question. You know, getting people to come to our schools and getting people, it's, yeah, you're right, can't get them on budget. What if we just take it to them? What if we just take as many pictures as we can of all the different things and just flood the newspaper, flood Facebook, flood those areas? And do it, you know, don't do it as if we're shoving something down somebody's throat, but do it as if this is what we're talking about. We know that people are too busy to come to school. We know that it's difficult. Let us bring some of these things to you because there's some that we could take at the high school or Slater or the middle school, and people are going to look at it and go, I didn't know it was like that. You know? And there's plenty of good things too, but the bad things are the water leak we had in the radiator about a month ago.
well, that's what I'm getting at with,
How do we get it off the them?
we can all take pictures and stuff, but gotta be somebody who specializes in this. They come in, do all the photographs, put together a video and say, hey, we're gonna present out at the tribe, and then we're gonna present down at the community center, we're gonna present in this room, we're gonna present, come and see what we're trying to show you, and you tell us, are you willing to consider voting yes on a bond that might raise your taxes considerably for the next 20 years?
I think what Mr. Medley suggested would definitely be the first step, expensive first step. And then I think we do need a professional. And another thing, and I have no idea how you would go about it. I know that Mr. Quick writes some grants for us and stuff, but that article I just read about Portland is wanting $120 million to move one of their schools away from the I-5 corridor, and because of their lobbying power, they'll probably get that passed.
Just a
And
moment.
to move this, I don't know if they're talking about literally moving the school or
Or
if
if they're talking about building.
relocating. 120 mil. And I know that the state is just giving gobs of money through grants. I don't know how, and not the ones that you get in a newsletter for education. I think you have to seek them out. And so maybe we need to call in some professionals. It'd be worth our money to get a professional that would know how to set this up for the community, gauge their feedback and promote it to them. But also someone that knows how to seek out government money that grants so that maybe the bond wouldn't be such a burden on the community. I don't know. I don't know if anyone in the community, anyone in the county utilizes grant writing to that extent. I don't think the county government does or the hospital.
think so. In comparison, like to last time, I think you also, I believe, in my opinion, which I'm not usually in favor of spending more money, but it needs to be presented like, we're not fixing stuff, we're making it right, and this will be the last time. This bond will be paid for before we ask you for money again.
Right.
Yeah. It's not, this isn't another Band-Aid, we're gonna ask you for more money again later, 10 years.
We could begin the process with Robert's idea of staff and stuff, taking photos of the bad things. You can run it, we'll give you all the pages you want to run that kind of stuff. It's news. We write up a little story with every photo. Or 1 month we'll run the middle school, and then 1 month the high school, 1 month later. Look how much more professional this office is compared to what we used to have board meetings in.
Yeah,
It's gonna cost, but you gotta start. Now, this time frame might be a little off, but starting with Robert's idea and then saying, now we know a person we can, or a firm we can hire that can take us to the next level. They could say now, we're not gonna get it done by November 23. 24 might be a shot. Maybe by 24, the national economic system will be on an upswing again. Instead of down.
Yeah, unfortunately, we all know this needs done, probably sooner rather than later. Anybody who's driven to the gas station knows this is gonna be a super tough time to ask somebody for money. Like,
and that's, I think, a professional would help with time, because this is a good time to start the process, especially if people realize we're talking about in a few years after any possible recessions have subsided. I think it's a good time to start that process. And so if we, before the next board meeting, if we could maybe start that process and at least compiling the pictures or the evidence to put in the newspaper, if staff members are willing to take pictures and submit them, that would be awesome. And then if we could find out how much it would cost, or at least a contact for a firm that could professionally take us to the next level. And if anybody knows state representatives or anything, could ask them, how do we get some of that money that they're handing out?
I'm sure.
Is that why you're saying? I know somebody like that.
Yeah, because they are just doling it out, which I don't agree with, but they would be handing it out anyway.
on that note, what's that new bill I passed about future funding? How's that going? You know, you guys,
Summer school.
well, there was a new
Oh, no,
deal
there's
about investing in teaching. It just passed this week or last week. No, but
And I feel like this is another area where if we devoted some resources to an HR person besides recruitment and HR issues, they could also work on seeking out these funds. Because it sounds like for some organizations, that's dang near a full-time job, and you can't run the organization day to day and be writing grants all the time. So
Let's go ahead and do that. Let's just have our staff. Not a mandate, but if staff sees something that you feel might make a good little story, like you talked about the membrane. I'm happy. On the news.
just like with the iReady testing, those kids would realize, I don't like sitting there scratching my head because I don't understand this Pythagorean theorem. I should take this testing seriously so that they can readdress this in my education and teach me. If a staff member doesn't like this leak in their room or whatever, take a picture of it. Yeah. So what else do you need from us?
So really, looking at this timeline, is it really make a lot of sense to like 2B on here, you know, the bond committee will present bond capital plan to the Harney County School District Board that estimated cost, funding options, and a recommended bond election plan. But before you even get there, I mean, you're gonna have to, like on 2A, contract with that architectural firm, that financial bond specialist, communications professional, and other needed individuals and services to advise the district leadership on the overall facility and safety improvement process. Now that first one there, I mean, we're reviewing the bond that happened in 2020 to see, hey, what was it about that plan that didn't work? Also going back and saying, what do we need to do moving forward? I think a professional group coming in to help us start the process, but I think in the fall to get somebody to come in and help us with that, it's reasonable. It's not to say you have to pass a bond right away, but I think it gets us on the right path. So when the economy does allow for us to go to those borders, we're ready to move.
I would start with the financial bond specialist and or communications professional before the architectural firm. Try to make sure we have some money that we'll be able to give before we decide how we're going to spend it.
And that's really, by the way, to say, hey, you got half the money already.
One thing that will be to our benefit is that current bond we're paying off of should be coming off by the time this one rolls in, because we have waited a couple of years. It's gotta be close.
That's a good selling point to the
The
voters.
last
when we
time
get to that
it
point.
overlapped the hair. I think this go around, if you're just doing a replacement, adding a hair onto it, doesn't sting as much. Not adding, the other one was going to add a little bit more because the other one was off.
Well, I agree with what Robert said there about get the bond specialist and the communications professional before we work on it. Yeah.
Ultimately, I mean, by November this year, is that a reasonable time to come back to you with, hey, here's what we've been able to do? And then at that point, you guys can really say, hey, so we're forward at this point.
Excellent plan.
So for now, again, it's a work in progress. Like that last 2C, the communication plan is completed and starts in January 2023. That would, by November of that year, you'd want to get something passed. And really, as a board, you'd have to sit down and say, do you want to do it in the spring? Do you want to do it that November? And if you need to put it into the following spring. I would say in most cases, the general election in November is not the best time to pass one of these. My experience.
So angry about everything else.
Yeah, exactly. That's about the time to get the tax statements and just you gotta time things right. But I think we'll at least put together something in the fall. So I think we'll stick with that. We can change it down the road depending on how you guys feel. I think that would cool. Also, if we got a chance to look it over. District needs to carry out actions based on specific strategies detailed in this plan and be responsible for collecting, analyzing data to measure progress. And then the board itself should receive quarterly progress reports in August, November, March, and June. And I think all how we're doing on all these things. I think if it's on our plan, like, hey, these are the months we're looking at it, kind of help hold yourselves accountable for making sure, holding me accountable, make sure it's on our agenda and that we're actually put it out there as far and wide as we possibly can. Share with people, hey, here's the direction that we want.
I like the language of this plan, and I particularly like the specificity of the performance indicators and the metrics. And I like the idea also that it is a tool document. So if we come back in November and decide we need to push back one of those deadlines, it's all right to do, but I think it's good to have those goals. And so I thought this was a good document. Thanks, Mr. Fulton, for representing the board on that. To everyone that worked hard on it, I thought it turned out.
I would make a motion, we accept the strategic plan.
A second,
Second that.
all in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Strategic plan is approved. Next on the agenda is donations. Is there a volunteer to remove donations?
I'll read them.
No donations. Next order of business is the certified renewals and extensions. Has everyone had an opportunity for those? Mr. Quick, do you have anything to say about those?
I'd say I'm with Walter, I would recommend all the ones that non time by law need to renewals by March.
I will make a motion that we accept the 2023 administrative renewals and extensions, non-extensions. As presented.
Certified.
Oh, I read the wrong one. I'm sorry. Certified teacher renewals and extension non-renewals 2020, 22, 23.
Any second? All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Certified renewals and extensions passes unanimously. Administrative renewals and extension. Questions or discussion about those? Anything to say about those? No.
As I recommend.
And I will go ahead and make the same motion that we accept the 22, 23 administrative renewals and extensions.
Second that.
Any seconds? All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Administrative renewals and extensions passes unanimously. Next order of business is the superintendent contract renewal. I really appreciate Mr. Quick being flexible and saying we can wait till the end of the year. Good, even though technically by state law, it's not done by the 15th, it's automatically. But I think everyone has seen a copy of that. He emailed us a copy a few months ago. And the suggestion would be, there have been some things that came up with language, like the fact that we're always rushing to get the evaluation done by the end of January and some other things. But we would like to do some succession planning in some of our future meetings this year. And so the recommendation would be to leave the language as is for now. And in terms of the compensation, the current contract already spells out the compensation for the next 2 years. For that third year, we need to have that in the contract.
Right, and so it's similar with the teaching contract. I think the administrators, the contracts themselves, now in June, contracts. Is put together to that's what your contract. That's something that I have to push. So I would say same month that we take care of the administrative contracts, not necessarily their renewal, but that we would take care of any changes to my contract, like having to do with salary or within that contract.
When we do that?
Before the end of the school year.
So if we have a motion to extend the contract, it would basically be an extension of the 21-24 contract. We have a copy.
It would include the timeline only for today. It wouldn't necessarily, the language would stick the same unless you negotiated something different. But the year part, the extension, the length of it is what you would discuss. Consider.
And it's, we have to annually decide whether or not to renew the contract, but we can renew it for 3 years. So we have to annually readdress it. And the other thing that I would input in there is OSBA is going to put together a comparable superintendent's salary so that later this year, when we talk succession planning, we can talk about the salary and make sure that it's comparable to up to our peers. And we can talk about cost of living and all that stuff later this year when we talk about salary. So is there any thoughts or discussion on if not, I would entertain a motion to your contract.
I will make that motion to renew the 22-23 or superintendent extension 22 to 25.
For a second. All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion to extend superintendent contract 3 years passes unanimously. Personnel.
First, on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of our teachers. Especially our newer staff members, they really stress out when they see their name. Like, we're gonna let you would know well in advance if you weren't going to. So I thought that. But right now. Forward, especially our first year. They don't know the process.
That's good. Continuity has been shown by all the studies. So.
I did say my show was next.
For personnel, I think we had listed 2 hires and 2 resignations. Is that right?
3 resignations.
Who was the 3rd resignation?
Odell. I would put a classified employee on here as well, Barry Graham, but that was him on there. Recognition. Back for a history. It's time to call it quits. Really put our school on the map and good job with kids. Public recognition.
Can we pass the hires and resignations? Are there any questions or discussion on hires and resignations? I accept the motion to approve hires and resignations.
Except the new hires and resignations.
Second, all in favor, signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion to accept the new hires and resignations passes unanimously. Audit.
Required to approve contract with us.
I didn't look back to see has inflation caught up and they charge more for this coming year. Well, it's something we have to make sure. And I've heard some organizations talk about how it's important to put audits out to bid, at least periodically, but it seems like it's to our advantage to have a firm that's familiar with our situation.
Figuring out how to use business. If it's not working, then maybe.
Yeah, we have some issues that might be with, but in this situation, in our geographical location, I think we're fortunate to have this particular firm. So I would make a motion to accept the audit contract and audit engagement letter if we can do that all in one motion.
seconded by Jill. All in favor of approving the audit contract as presented, signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. And that's an action item.
Just because they're spending, because they're going over. Also, right out, perfect time for it because trying to get everybody ready for it the week before, in this case. We have to get them ready for the following week. So crossing our fingers that they're gonna be ready on that Monday to get rolling, but I would say there's probably not very many schools throughout the state that do not go to school. The pandemic probably scared a lot of them off. A lot of centers were closed, but also in terms of schools with masks and things like that, they will go exactly with whatever our protocols are. So it's not like you're stepping into something like, now we're gonna have to wear masks and do something different. Like whatever protocols we're gonna implement, they'll honor. So it's working with us nicely. It's nice to see our kids. To me, I don't know, part of the school year, going outdoors, science. So you need board approval.
Questions or discussion? Sounds awesome. I would entertain a motion to approve outdoors.
I think.
Is there a second?
Second.
And seconds, all in favor signify by aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously. That sounds good. Now for discussion, we had the biomass kind of on there, and we asked at the last meeting, Mr. Quick put together a report on expenses and sent that out, so just have a discussion about what we do for that report, and also it would be ideal if we had someone from the board represented on their board, since we have that ability, but it's a big commitment, so that's just a discussion. If we had a representative from, if our board was represented.
In addition to me going to those meetings, it would be nice to have a board member that's also kind of like in the know.
What's their meeting schedule? Set?
You know, we work it out with Pete Reynolds and myself with Lori Chief, to figure out what time was best for us. You know, with the board members on there, you know, the middle of the day, it's probably not best, but we adapt our schedule.
Say that I probably have the most open schedule to represent the board, so as long as someone, Steve, calls me and says, hey, we gotta go, I will be happy to represent the board and see what we can do to try to get a better handle on what we inherited.
That would be awesome.
That's this last one. That's all.
Could have been there when they tried to tell us we had to do it. I was involved with that as a different.
It was the one I shared with you today, and I shared it with you really late. We'll kind of we'll be able to see the different buildings and how much they spend on electricity and oil. But try to update it so you kind of give it a good feel for what we spend in the other buildings for.
And maybe this isn't doable. I don't know. Is there any way to get like a per student expense, like how much Slater spends per student, how much Harney spends per student, how much high school spends per student? Like, you know, like we have a total, but I'm not sure how many students are in each school. So if we could have, like, you know, if it's costing us $1,500 per student for the year for energy. Yeah, just the total divided by how many students, so that.
Cost us too much to eat.
Well, that's, well, I mean, it's because you know, like I say, that number from the biomass thing, it's later, you know, in the early discussions about getting rid of Lincoln, it was because it was 43,000 to 45,000 a year to eat. And that's a lot, it's way more.
So we paid an oil bill today that we're like, biomass isn't such a bad idea.
That's the problem. Then you start running something down, something happens. Otherwise, okay, let's go cut down
It's still
some trees.
pretty high. It would be helpful if we ask those questions that you don't know. forces us to kind of go back through some things. Where we pay, because right now we're paying the lion's share of the cost. You know, it's a fair and equitable way of fighting it out. We need to look at it.
Yeah, because according to this, our combined total cost for all schools combined for electrical, propane, and oil is less than our cost for that biomass per year. What is the difference between MMBTU and cost?
So
So that's a number of units.
so you're not going to be able to compare the BTUs that the biomass is producing as opposed to kilowatts of electricity versus for the number of, I don't think you, because you really only have how many gallons, how much each gallon costs.
So Heinz is all oil and for heat.
Heinz is all heat.
So when it says biomass energy cost, in October through May has some figures that fluctuate, that is the consumable cost.
And that's the piece that's not really broken down within the biomass. It doesn't really say how much of our fee is going towards the loans and things like that, and how much the fee is going towards buying material, how much is going towards maintenance. It's not really broken down that way right now. But it might be helpful for you to be able to say, hey, here's how much we pay towards the loan every month as a co-op.
Yeah, when that ends. You have an information.
Right.
What our payment is on the loan and when that loan ends would be helpful. Because I don't know when they determine.
Because part of that payment is not just your cost of heating,
Right.
it's cost of building the place.
This district assumed part of the loan, bioland equipment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I got from the presentation. And I didn't get enough information. I wish I would ask more questions. Some of the questions didn't hit me till later that night. I'm like, wait.
It's a fair minimum of $26,000. You take the lowest column for cost, and figure that is the loan and the maintenance and everything else. Take everything above that as cost. That's a minimum of $46,000 a year. I mean, it's hard to tell by how this is broken down because, of course, electricity. This isn't just electricity for heating; it's for total electricity.
Right.
I'm guessing none of the other schools have $46,000 in heating costs. That's a lot.
Yeah. I guess I should.
If the system ran like perfect, I mean, I think you could probably get through a heating season with $20,000 to $25,000 worth of chips. There was nothing else you had to do. It does cost us, I would say, 20 grand easy a year just bringing those chips. Now you got a load of chips, you got meat chips, you got spoiled chips.
Walnut price is
And
gonna
then when
go up.
things- and then when things break down, now you got breakdown costs. Heads up. If it just ran smoothly, it would probably be super efficient.
Where are we? You know where they get those? I know
It varies. No, it really varies, kind of depends. Last year, they had a whole bunch of them come out of Central Oregon. There was some bunch of pallet material that they chopped up.
It started off very, very well because Silver's Dog and Ranch had decks and decks of logs.
Oh,
Right.
And they just donated. Just had to send a grinder up there, one spot, and chip, and haul chip. Those are gone, but the plan, the strategic plan for that thing, which is probably why I got thrown off that board the first time.
well, I drove through Seneca the other day at the pole mill. There's mountains of sawdust. And it looked like they were trying to burn someone right there on site when I drove by the other day. So I'm curious if we're acquiring that from the best source possible.
Well, we were trying,
Yeah.
we tried the varieties, which we tried juniper, we tried the pine, we tried a lot of different things. Some works better than others.
Oh,
If it gets too small, like you just get like the chips you throw on a playground, then it burns too fast.
Oh, so that,
You can burn it, but it just burns too hot, too fast.
yeah, the cast off from the feeler mill is pretty small. Yeah. And so it's pretty.
And really, it's just a matter of finding the right amount. But like you said, right, they have a Forest Service agreement right now, so you have access to be able to get these lash piles, but then it comes down to grinding. And we don't own a grinder. So to hire somebody in to grind it out, you know, labor, it's the cost of the grinder, it adds up. It sounds like in a perfect world, it sounds beautiful, like get all this juniper up in the forest that needs to go away. You got these slash piles that needs to go away. But ultimately, it's like getting it from the forest to town and getting it ground up in a way that makes sense. I haven't found that. It's just a way.
That's another recycling. It's not work.
Well, I mean, another one, deal especially right now today with the just rising costs of fuel, transportation and stuff, that it's gonna become even more.
Pulling it out of the forest is not.
Yeah.
I don't see any way that the other partners involved can be shouldering their portion of the burden. And you said we have the lion's share, and I understand because it's housed with us and how the grants work. And Mrs. Chief described it to us last year, but there's 4 other partners. And even if they had half as many BTUs as us, if they were paying the same amount we are, that would be $500,000 a year. And I don't believe, and so it would be good to have Mr. Fulton on. It's a lot of this. All right. Anything else about the biomass?
Not till we know more information, yeah, we gotta know more, a lot more.
Thanks for this report. That was shocking. The next order of business for discussion is the pandemic and hopefully the end of the pandemic. But I was thinking, see if Mr. Quick needs something from the board. I didn't know if we needed a policy to say how we go forward. And then I thought the last thing we or the state or feds need is another policy. But I think we need to remind the community and our staff and everyone that after the 12th, we go back to mask optional like they've always been. This isn't the first time people have donned masks when there was a community illness. Mask optional, and remind everyone that we don't tolerate discrimination as a district, not for mask shaming, not because someone's wearing a mask or not wearing a mask. We don't tolerate discrimination. I just thought it was important that we discuss that if we need to and remind them. And that's how we roll.
I think as long as all of our building administrators know that the word optional, don't penalize it if you're wearing one, and see him being ostracized for it, try to step in. Don't penalize somebody for not wearing it. It's normal. You're right. People wear masks. Always have on planes. Yeah, I mean, you're right. We don't need any more rules, mandates. I would make that motion.
It makes me wonder, in this situation, is it better for building administrators, for instance, to instruct their staff of how to handle that and do some teaching with the students about how we handle it? Or is it better to just let it happen and not make a big deal of it, not draw attention to the fact that some students, yeah, he's shaking his head, can't tell because he's got a mask on, but not draw attention to it, just let it be, and I guess trying to reinforce good behavior, if the bad behavior, but if there's bullying or anything else that goes on, that's probably best.
I guess also, or do we need to let? I would imagine most kids have found out by now, but does there need to be some information?
Oh, they know.
Well, that's what I assume they
The
know.
next 2 days are gonna be our most challenging with that.
Well, at the high school, middle school level, I'm sure. Actually, I was more curious, like the grade school level,
Personally, I'd say just let it go.
We're not, I speak for Aaron and myself. Long enough, I know, well, we're not concerned. I mean, our teachers are all prepared, our students, we don't foresee any bullying and harassment. If it happens, we're gonna treat it no different than we would any other bullying. or harassment. I mean, it's gonna be it's just gonna be, it is what it is, and if it happens, and we deal with it the first time, I think it's gonna be a minimal issue. Knock on wood, but I think people are gonna be relieved enough not have to wear them, they're not gonna wanna cause problems for people.
Part of what it is, they just, I mean, 5 minutes later, it's not a big deal. And I think something like, are you wearing that? Because I want to, or because my mom said I have to, like, I'll still go, and I really. Sometimes you get it with the.
I just think they're first. School.
They have never not worn it years. Till next Monday, they'll never not wear the mask.
But I think after the first couple days. And they didn't know, like before, they were always worried about the bus, basically, filling in the buses is the same thing. They're not required on buses stuff. We had 2 more days of it essentially.
There was something else that popped in my brain that had to do what the administration might do for us, and it was in terms of how to do with the pandemic.
Isn't it
Asking.
729 days or something like that? For the day you had to send the kids home? Till Saturday? Yeah, so 729 days. It'll be 729 days when they're, that's crazy.
I don't know, it seemed like it was important, but it must not have been, and I guess it needed something else.
We'll be back next month.
Was it, I guess my question would be is, as far as the bullying and as far as if you happen to be bullied for wearing a mask in the guidelines for the schools, will this already being bullied for that or vice versa? Does it already fall into a category? I mean, it already falls, just bullying in general. So it falls into a category, so we don't need to make a specific, like in this particular category, it doesn't need to also say, and if you are wearing or not.
No. Bullying.
No, and I agree, I just didn't know if there was some kind of language out there we had to worry about, or.
No, that's one of the things that's frustrating me about discrimination policies and any of those is when they call out special classes, because that is inherently discriminative to do that, to call out.
Yeah, it's
special
already
classes.
illegal.
We don't
You don't
tolerate
need to-
discrimination at all. So, all right. Anyway, there's no other discussion on that. That's exciting. It's coming to an end. For policy discussion, we had DVD. And we discussed at the last few meetings that for the last couple of years, several years, we've had a pretty hefty getting balance, carryover balance. And we talked about earmarking a portion of that money, some percentage possibly that we set forth that would be held as a rainy day fund that we could name out what those uses would be. For example, retaining staff during economic hardship or things like that. It would be set aside just for that, which would not only make sure that we have a fund for if things turn south, but it would also free up that other money that we're not currently utilizing. And so Mr. Quick put together that policy that we looked over last time, but we didn't want to do an official read or pass it because we were missing a couple members. And I think the one thing we were still, Mr. Quick, was the percentage.
Probably have to project this where we're gonna end this year.
So the OSBA model sample, it had 8% on it. And it's worded, I had to read it a few times to fully understand it because of the wording. The unrestricted fund balance is something after the audit is completely done. Or you could figure it out during the year, but you don't budget for an unrestricted amount. You budget for an unappropriated amount. So it's a little different. But So I was looking at and it's just in the general fund, I'm assuming, because you don't have unappropriated or reserves for special revenue. Other funds, just general fund. 8% of the adopted revenue, which is what this suggests, is 944,000. So we would create the budget and probably not budget for 944,000. And that's just sits in unappropriated. You can't spend it unless there's an emergency, and there's a few emergencies that qualify. So you don't budget for that. And then throughout the year, as long as you follow your budget, you'll end with at least 944,000 unspent. And then that is what your unrestricted fund balance is. But if you say we have to use this for salaries, then you would actually assign it to salaries, and then it's not unrestricted.
Consider emergency, we need to specify what constitutes.
We know the Oregon budget law. Or like if this building flooded and you had to build, that would be an emergency that you could use those natural disasters.
Because I don't think we're ready to take action on it tonight. And there's not a rush because we haven't started the budgeting process, right? As long as we get done before we budget.
Our first budget.
April 5th, isn't it? Isn't it April 5th or something like that?
It will be available April 5th, I think, and then the first budget.
So if, for example, there was a huge budget shortfall statewide in 2 years, that would constitute an emergency. And if we were going to have to let go staff members because we don't have the funding, we couldn't access those funds for salaries if we use the emergency.
Not necessarily, you do it on a year-to-year basis. So if we, on the budget that's presented in April, have 900,000 appropriated, that's just for the 2020 year. And then when you go to do the next budget, you decide, okay, was that a good idea? Do we want to continue that? Or is it not looking good for 23, 24? Do we need to pull that back out and actually spend it, budget for it? So it's just on a year-by-year basis.
You're
That's
not
what this
making and adding this up, you're not accumulating.
Correct. If you do it as the 8%, you only set aside 8% every year, not a cumulative 8%.
Ballpark, how much do we have? How much do we probably have this coming?
I have not started doing it. We ended the year with 4 million.
So significantly more than 8% though. That
Yes.
We could feel comfortable doing that, because I think if we're gonna do it, especially since we have around $4 million or a lot, better to err on the side of a higher number. And I know that Vince Adams from OSBA, he's on the Albany board, he said they went high and did 12%. That kind of saved what they can during some crisis they had, and they were able to staff on because of the 12%. So I think if I was gonna choose a number.
But it sounds like that's different than what, I think we're talking about two different things, because it doesn't sound like there's any emergency that constitutes using it for staff.
Correct.
But at the end of the year,
Yes.
if you decide you could potentially not have the funds to pay staff, that's when you take those funds and you move them to staff funding.
Because we pretty much know what the state funding is going to be. I mean, it's still based on our APM for 22, 23. We know what the 9 billion or whatever the state is allotting. So we just have to figure out where we fall into that with the APM. So that funding we know for the most part. So we know what 22, 23 funding is going to be. So I think you could plan to set aside, unappropriate some funds for the 22.
Do you want to pick a number? Do you want to pass this so that somebody can plan our budget before you?
Well, the budget person. Probably doesn't sound important right now. I really think it's It's coming up so fast.
Well, we would have to do it before April, right?
Yeah.
Have it in the budget.
You want a policy, yes.
Or could you?
But we're just hung up on.
Or-
Policy,
Well,
but it's based on how much
Yeah, or
budget.
whatever.
I mean, we can see what happens with the budget and set aside the best we can and not have a policy in place, but know that that is the consensus of the board that you would like to see something in contingency or unappropriated. Because contingency, if you're not familiar with that word, it is budgeted, it's just not categorized yet. So you put 900,000 in contingency, well, you can move it out of contingency, it doesn't have to be an emergency. You just do a budget resolution or a supplemental budget, depending on the amount, or you move it out of contingency into salaries.
So if we move it out of contingency into the unappropriated fund.
At any point in the year.
Any point of the year, yes, but you don't put it in unappropriated, you move it into a category like salaries or support,
So
so you can spend it.
So so if we got a contingency fund at any time, we can move money out of that to cover what you're concerned about.
And we know what the salaries are, the salary schedule is for next year. We did this budget, we weren't sure where that was gonna land, so. Yes.
So why would you do the other one? Why would you?
Really just can't touch the unappropriated.
No, well, that's what I meant, is if you can put
It
it
seems
in,
safer to put it in contingency, right? You're saying.
that's what it sounds
So
like to me.
you could use it.
Which
Yeah,
is
you
already
can-
there. We wouldn't have to act on
And you wouldn't have, you wouldn't have to wait for the end of the year to then put it in.
I would say if you do it the other way, it would be more of a protection. So if you're in contract negotiations, you'd say, well, this is this amount. Touch it. It's not an emergency, right? Or if they see it in contingency, they'd be like, well, yeah, you have money. You can appropriate it any time. But if it's not, you touch it.
Doesn't even show up in this budget doc. Shows up, I think, as a little line item saying there is unappropriated funds. It's not.
And we could, indirectly, we could use those unappropriated funds, just not for that year of the budget.
Right.
Because that's what we're planning on. Now that you guys talk about, it doesn't make me as uncomfortable because we just have to plan ahead.
Right.
and make a budget resolution.
Well, for the unappropriated
Yeah.
stuff. And I like that it would be drawn out for things like negotiating things. And so we have a real good idea of this is how much money we have to spend, but we know we have this.
Appropriates for next year.
Yeah.
If for some reason you wait us money next year, we have that money to pull back into our general.
So we know we are.
Yes.
Like, if we said, for example, 12%, and then we get through our budgeting process and realize, shoot, that's gonna make things tight somewhere else, we can always amend our policy.
Can we amend it after the budget's already started?
I would probably be against policy if we presented the budget.
What if you split the difference?
Well, whatever you guys.
Okay, I'm just-
The eight, where the number 8 come from?
That's
Um,
just a sample.
Okay. We said eight would be about 900.
44,000.
Would it be realistic to be able to put the budget together initially and be able to see what number that would be, what percent it would be, so if the board, like, is where it kind of falls. Yeah. Set your policy. Later.
12% is, would have been 1.4 million.
But we have 4 million in contingency right now, right?
4 million carryover right now,
There you go.
which that doesn't scare me as bad because last year did end up better than thought. I have got enough into doing the budget to give you a good answer.
I just don't, I like that we have extra money, but I don't like if we're not making 40% full use of our resources. I feel comfortable with set some aside for ourselves and then could make more full use of what was left over. If we pull $1 million, roughly $1 million out of that 4 million, and now we can use a bigger chunk of this 3 million because we know we have this fund set aside, hire some FTE or something. I'd be comfortable with the appropriation, and I'd be okay with passing in tonight for anywhere between 8 and 12 or whatever you guys think. But it sounds like it'd be better to do it now than later. Be easier for the budget process. More.
If you do it now, we will present a budget.
I'd be happy.
You know, we'll figure out.
What is 10 to 12? What is 10?
What must be a 1.15 or something? 1.175, somewhere in there.
About one.
So to make this policy copacetic with what we discussed, we're going to insert 10 in place of 8 there. And then we need to change the wording on our responsibility to establish an unrestricted fund balance. Does that need a different term, unappropriated?
I don't think so. I think the way we get to unrestricted.
Okay. So all we have to do is insert our,
Insert 10 where 8 is and stop it.
I'll second that.
oh, all in favor of adopting DBE 10% set aside for unrestricted fund balance, signify by aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign, and motion passes unanimously. And the one last thing for discussion that I had, which we already talked about, but typically, traditionally, at least for the last few years, we don't talk about our new goals for the year until the end of the school year, which is when we've usually done our final evaluation. And I think maybe at our next board meeting this spring, when we start talking about planning for the board, planning for the superintendent, we should consider revamping our schedule. So, because not only for Mr. Quick's contract, which we can get into that language and change so, but for state law, by March 15th, we have to extend the contract. Before we do an extension, we have to do a formal evaluation. And so instead of going from June to June with our final evaluations, it would make more sense to go from January to January. And if that's the case, we need to start talking about goals next month rather than June or July. So I think that's something we should probably put on our agenda next time. And so if there are any great ideas for goals you have, I think the strategic plan has some really good goals and metrics in it. Mr. Quick talked about even focusing on math and maybe making a metric on math for student performance. And if there's anything else that we feel we need to address as a district.
I feel like we could break down some of our assessment scores to really kind of identify areas focus on, help the staff, district as a whole, like, hey, here's what we're working on, here's our baseline, want to see it improve as a district. So, and if I like where we
Yeah, then instead of having 6 months to work on goals, you have the better part of the year. For next year, you have a whole year. So that's all I have. Does anyone else have any reports that they'd like to see or discussion topics? Seeing none, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thanks, guys. Night.